Okay, saludos, mi gente. Welcome to the Hispanic Promise Summit on the fourth pillar of the Hispanic Promise, and that is retain. We're going to have a great conversation about retention, the challenges that are facing Hispanics and Latinos when it comes to retention in corporate America. My name is Sid Wilson. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, a proud partner of the We All Human Foundation, as well as among one of the founders with Edelman of the Hispanic Promise when we started it in 2019 at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. So we're going to have a great topic. I do want to thank all of you for tuning in on this important topic because while there's a lot of discussions about recruiting and inclusion, this is about retention. Like, how do we create a culture that fosters retention for Latinos in corporate America? At HACR, we did a research study a few years ago and found that there was about a 20% attrition for Latinos in corporate America. And according to research studies conducted by other institutions, there are about 76% of Latinos do not feel like they can be their true authentic selves in corporate America. That's a huge statistic, indicating that there must be a lot of work that needs to happen in order for us to create a truly inclusive and belonging culture in corporate America for Hispanics and Latinos. So we have an esteemed panel of leaders that are going to lead us through this session, and we're going to have some great dialogue about what are the challenges and what are the opportunities to improve the issues of retention for Latinos in corporate America. Joining us, we have Brenda Reuter, Senior Director for Diversity and Inclusion for Ally Financial. We have Ketelyn Jesus, VP of Finance and Global Markets for IBM. We have Tish Archie-Oliver, Head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging for Unilever, and Fernando Delgado, Global Head of Executive Search for Johnson & Johnson. So welcome our panelists, and thank you all for not only for the work that you do at your companies, but also for sharing your best practices here at the Hispanic Promise Summit. So let's go to my first question for our panel, and that is, what is the current situation of retention for Hispanic workforce, and what are the key issues that lead to low retention rates for Hispanics in corporate America?
Why don't I start? I think you covered really well, Sid, in the beginning, right? We do have a very pulsing challenge with retention being one of our biggest struggles, right? We hire Latinos and Hispanics into the corporate world, and as the years goes by, they tend to evade, right? I think the 20% you mentioned in the beginning is a fair representation, and in my view, there is like three major pillars why this happened, right? I think when we hire them well, we start preparing them well, but as the years go by, there's three things that I think it's a daily reminder of the community, which is the sense of belonging, right? You want to be part of where you really belong, and we want to make sure that the corporate is ready for that. The second one, we face biases. We might not want to say that out loud, but we do, right? And the third, and for me, one of the most important ones, the lack of representation. You want to look to the top, you want to look to the positions you aspire, and you want to see people that you identify with. And we are still struggling that in most of the corporations as we see it.
Thank you. Brenda?
As you laid those out, I think to that, I would add just a couple of things. Right now, when we talk about retention, post-pandemic, endemic, I'm kind of using air quotes there and hoping that Omicron has seen its way out the door. But we are in an environment where employees have choices, and employees are going to make a choice to go to an organization, much as was just stated, where they feel like they belong. They feel like there's not that level of bias, and they do see a lack of representation. So this is probably the first time in almost 10 years plus, at least, that we've really seen that employees can make those choices and move quickly. So I think that is a huge component of retention, and something that as employers that we need to be acutely aware of and figure out how to implement strategies to best mitigate that. And I think it's an incredible opportunity for us all to have this conversation today to talk about how we can go about doing that from a corporate standpoint.
Fernando, what are your thoughts on the current situation for retention for Hispanic workforce? And what do you think are the key issues that are impacting retention?
Well, no, great question, Sid. And first and foremost, it's been exacerbated after the COVID pandemic. I think people reevaluating their priorities. And so therefore, Latin professionals specifically are in high demand. And so as there's a retention issue, there's also an opportunity to attract talent, right? Because there are two parts to that equation. So I think the companies that will seize the moment will be the folks that not only are able to attract, but also retain and develop that talent through time, and therefore minimize their attrition, where others will suffer, the consequences of not developing their talent.
Great, thank you. So, when we hear about the challenges of inclusion, of retention, and we think about the overall culture, can you talk about where does corporate America have a responsibility to create a culture of inclusion and belonging to help foster that level of retention? So why don't I go back to Ketelyn and then Brenda.
Sounds good. For me, it's almost like the corporate America has to unlock the power of the advantage that a diversity can bring to the table, right? So corporate America, we need to more and more. And when I say corporate America, I put myself into it. It's each one of us within these companies, right? We need to keep beating the drum that the more diverse table we have, there's only benefit to it. Latinos and Hispanics is a part of it. There's many other pieces to it, but a modern workforce, we are talking about a globalized workforce. We're talking about a non-barrier work. We're talking about the words that came together during the pandemic that Brenda mentioned, right? We can't think that some of our differences we should have to be apart. No, we need to make sure that each one of us, which is part of corporate America, right? We understand how beneficial for the employees, for the company, for the business, for the world, for us to make a better world, right? To have a diverse sitting at the table and to make sure that, so it starts with the knowledge that the difference is good. It's acknowledged that having this diverse background, having this diverse heritage will only benefit that group of people working together.
So what are your thoughts?
It's interesting because I'm pretty passionate about DE&I. So every now and then I do get up on a soapbox, and I will say this question I think is so powerful in the fact that it is absolutely 100% our responsibility as corporate employers to create that sense of inclusion and belonging. I think of DE&I a lot. If you work for a manufacturing organization, safety is the cornerstone of everything. Every decision you make, it's about safety. Everything, it's about ensuring your employees are safe. If you work for a business, like a bank or consulting or something, we're always talking about risk and what's the risk, and making sure that we use those tenets to make decisions. And I think inclusion and DE&I and kind of that whole body of work is equally as important as if you were looking at risk, if you were looking at safety. And so to create an environment where, much as Ketelyn says, is you're inviting people to come to your organization, it's incumbent upon you to then say, hey, I want to hear what you have to say, because for all the points that Ketelyn just made is that we know, as study after study, research has shown, the more diverse the team is, the more ideas that you bring from, different parts of the world, different parts of the country, different parts of the neighborhoods, will really impact the way that you do business and will make your business work better. So I think it's incumbent upon the corporate employers to make sure that they foster that sense of inclusion once an employee does decide to be a part of that organization.
Great, thank you. And Tish, can you talk about what are your thoughts in terms of where does corporate America have a responsibility or an obligation to create a culture of inclusion and belonging that helps foster that level of retention that we need to see for Hispanics and Latinos in corporate America?
Question. That's a really great question, Sid. There is a Harvard Business Review study that shows that Latinos actually repress 76% of Latinos actually repress components of their identity, right? So that's anywhere from language, communication style, identity, etc. And so when you think about the impact that has on the workplace productivity, we're really not leveraging the different dimensions of diversity that people bring into the organization. So it's really important for us to not only have inclusive leaders and an inclusive environment, but to create an environment where people actually feel like they belong, like they're connected to their teams, they're connected to the organization. And we can go about doing this by creating a sense of awareness and cultural dexterity in the organization. It is really important for leaders and for colleagues overall to really have an understanding of different cultural identities that people bring into the organization. The other thing is that we all know representation is extremely important. People have to be able to see people that look like them in leadership roles so that they can believe there is a space for them in that organization. Last but certainly not least, it's really important for leaders and organizations to create sponsorship and mentorship programs and partnerships and relationships so that we are able to broach these relationships as underrepresented people in ways that may not necessarily be organic like our counterparts, but in ways that truly create not only that sense of belonging, but there will be people in the organization to advocate for them in those rooms that they're not in. So those are some of the things that I think that we as employers can do in order to strengthen that sense of belonging. And most importantly, leveraging the power of difference and being able to leverage the unique identities that people bring into our organizations.
Fernando, what are your thoughts on what are the biggest challenges currently facing Hispanic employees in the workforce?
Well, I think the challenges, especially Latinx or new Latin professionals joining the workforce, is really connecting and building a network within the organization, right? So as a new early career or young executive coming into an organization, I think it's important, in addition to the technical skills that you bring to a function that you're adding value to also create those networks and those relationships across and abroad within your line of work, but also within other segments and other business units in the company to continue to grow. That is and continues to be a huge challenge. I think inherently in Latin culture, we tend to let our work do the speaking for us. So we're not about boasting about what we do or trying to go above and beyond with building networks or connecting with folks. But in today's organizations, it's fundamental for professionals to continue to develop those relationships.
I want to follow up on something that you shared, and I'd love for all the panelists to get their thoughts, because you touched on something that's a key component that we hear in our own studies at HACR, as well as many other studies that are out there, and that is mentorship and sponsorship and how that impacts retention. I can tell you, early in my own Wall Street career, My staying at a company was really a function of who was mentoring me, seeing leaders that looked like me, that understood my Afro-Latino culture, and who can help me navigate through the internal corporate culture to help rise up the corporate ladder. And I think without that, I probably would have been looking elsewhere, and that played a major difference. Can we talk about what can corporate America do better? Because we know that there are mentorship initiatives, and they have taken us to certain lengths. But what can corporate America do better overall as an industry to really help foster not just the right mentorships, but mentorships that can be fostered into sponsorships, so that, as you mentioned, Tish, there are leaders at the top that are talking about you as you consider rising up the ladder. But can I come back to you, Tish, on that, and then I want to go to Brenda and then to Ketelyn.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to dig into the data. Before we broach any of this work, it is really important for us to understand the data. And I think allowing the data to serve as our North Star in the organization, right? So really understanding the rate at which we're hiring talent, the rate at which we're developing talent, and then most importantly, the rate at which we're retaining talent. And then I think to start to peel back the layers, to understand the why not. If we identify opportunities, if we identify differences with regards to the rate of promotion, the rate of development for people of color versus the majority group, then we first have to ask ourselves, why is that happening? And I think really getting ourselves immersed in the data before we just create programs on top of programs and then scratch our heads at the end of the year to understand why the needle isn't moving. And I think having that data serve as the North Star and then having a strategy to support the gaps that we're seeing with that data. I will tell you that we know that people of color, women, other underrepresented groups do not develop organic relationships the way that our white counterparts do. So it is really important for us to create a mechanism for us to be able to do so. But I think, again, if you get yourself immersed in the data will really, I think, show a lot of information that we didn't necessarily we weren't aware of, I would say, before we looked at the data. I think the other thing is creating equitable programming, right? So really understanding the unique needs of different communities. And this is why we have to develop the cultural competence of our leaders and our colleagues. But we have to understand where we are starting from as we're talking about the Hispanic community, understanding what the unique needs are for that community. And we can gather that data by so many different ways, whether it's focus groups or having a business resource group. So not just an employee resource group, but a business resource group in the organization that can provide insights and perspectives on the community to business leaders, helping business leaders form better business and talent decisions.
Great, thank you, Tish. Brenda, what are your thoughts?
Just made some amazing insights. I completely, the data in the DE&I space, data must drive decisions. One thing that we do at Ally, when we look at the data in terms of mobility, we really kind of look at the stratification within the data to say, okay, what is our representation for POC? What is it for Hispanic? What is it for African American, Black? What is it for Asian? Because as Tish kind of touched on, there's different needs within different communities, and making sure that we understand the unique needs of that underrepresented group within the organization. So looking at sponsorship or mentorship, I think one of the key components is we always go to the employee. We're, find a mentor, do this, find a sponsor. And what I really advocate for at Ally and something that our DE&I group does is really putting that onus and ownership on the executive. So instead of saying to the employee, do you have a mentor? It's going to the executive, to the C-suite, and say, who are you mentoring? Who are you sponsoring? Because it really cascades from the top down. So it's important to kind of have those bookends where you have employees who are looking for opportunities. I think mentorship, we implement programs. And in parallel to that, I think organic mentorships really do well when you kind of go out on a risk curve, and you may not feel comfortable, again, is what Tish cited with the Harvard Business Review, and maybe we don't feel like we can be our authentic selves, and there's a little bit of that risk taking that we kind of have to embark on to do some of those mentorships partnered with what the employer is doing, and then most importantly, really what the top level C-suite is being held accountable for, because at the end of the day, that power kind of lies in that group, and so we want them to be full partners. And I think that's the conversation that many of us are having now with our senior leaders and our executives, and part of why we're here today about people making commitments to say that yes, we believe that our Hispanic population and employee groups are important and significant enough that we are committing to making those changes. So there's lots of different ways that we can really pull together, and I think it's just essential that we recognize the fact that we do need to continue to move forward in creating those relationships and leveraging the data to understand where we've been and kind of where we're going.
Thank you. Ketelyn, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to piggyback from one last point that she said, and I'm going to share something that we've implemented in IBM, which was something recent, and we've been seeing a lot of good momentum on it. So agreed with everything said. We also analyzed the data, but at some point, we, even with the data, with the programs, very well-established programs across the company, we noticed that something was not like getting the traction we were looking at, right? People would get started with a mentor, but would not follow up 6 months later or whatever. So we decided to do something different. We did several roundtables with the Latino and Hispanic community and asked them, why not? What else is missing? Everybody says that mentorship is so important. Why are we not engaging? Well, long story short, I'm gonna net it down to you guys what we've done, and we are getting a lot of good traction on it. We decided that we would, for the more senior leaders, more senior talent we had in this community, myself and a couple of other executives went out there and we did a presentation about these talent people to a group of senior vice presidents and vice presidents for them to understand that talent. And each one of them volunteered based on some type of attribute that they had in common to be their mentors. So we did a more like a direct action to this high-end top talent. And then these same people that are now getting mentorship with high executives, we asked them to be mentors for all the new generation coming in. So we kind of engage the entire community, and everybody is being mentored by somebody. At the same time, they are mentoring somebody else that are coming new. So if you are a junior analyst, you are going to be mentored now by somebody that is a more senior analyst that is getting mentorship from a director or a vice president. It's a chain that everybody helps each other. And because now you feel, even if you're a junior analyst, you're going to mentor the next student or co-op we get into the company, everybody feels responsible for the success of the program. So I really think mentorship is exactly the concept of mentorship is really an important concept, and we need to go after. For us, it worked better when we change it a little bit and we engage the community to really feel accountable and responsible to make this program happen. So I just wanted to share. I think it's in the beginning, but we've seen it for like 6-7 months. But the outcome we've been hearing from the teams are very positive. I feel that everybody, when our community feels that they are getting help and they are also giving it back, it makes we unify that community, right? And I think everybody feels way more accountable, and also they feel the joy of giving it back And that created a really good momentum in this program for us.
Fernando, what are your thoughts on the role that corporate America can do to address the issues of retention in corporate America?
Well, I think we touched on those a little earlier, but it revolves around the whole idea of making a promise and keeping a promise, right? So it's about attracting somebody to an exciting opportunity, an exciting job, but then ensuring that it's not just a job, but also a career, right? So that people continue to evolve, continue to grow, and continuously stretching them within the organization. I mean here at J&J, we pride ourselves on the fact that we allow people to grow. We actually coined the phrase grow assignments, where we allow folks that are in a current role to explore 20 or 30% allocate their time to a new function or a new role to explore new opportunities cross-functionally and across different parts of the business. And we've reaped the benefits of it. I mean, you see folks here at J&J with 15, 20, 25 years careers, and that's not uncommon across different parts of the business. So we continue to excel at that, and I think it's a critical part that every organization needs to play in terms of the development of their professionals.
Great, thank you. Let me ask a question that is a common challenge with regards to retention for Hispanics, Latinos, and we often hear this a lot, and that is we often don't leave employers, we leave our bosses. And when we think about the spirit of the Hispanic promise, and when we think about the at HACR, we talk about the power of Hispanic inclusion. We recognize that this requires everyone to be a part of this process, whether you are from a diverse community or not. But we often hear that that our communities of color get it, the senior executives embrace it, but then there's that mid-level manager who's often the direct report who doesn't fully understand that they too must be a part of a culture of inclusion and belonging for Hispanics, Latinos, and for people of color. Can you talk about what do you believe could be some of the solutions to make sure that every employee, your direct reports, all the way up the ladder, understands and embraces the culture of belonging, that culture of retention, and that fostering? I'll tell you a really quick story as we answer the question. Early in my Wall Street career, I was actually invited to take some kids from Harlem to the New York Stock Exchange to give them a tour, to really help inspire them to consider a career on Wall Street. These were 7th and 8th graders. I remember telling the director of the department, thought a great idea, but the person that I was most fearful was going to say no was my boss. And I was like, okay, is he going to say yes? Because everyone else gets it. He finally said yes, but I remember thinking to myself, I don't know that he's going to say yes, because I never considered him as someone that was an ally to diversity and inclusion. So then I think that what happened to me happens all the time for all of us. So let me start with Brenda, and then maybe I'll then go to Ketelyn and then Tish. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because we kind of call it the frozen middle. In several companies that I've worked for, it's kind of a universal challenge. So I don't think it's unique for this panel, and it is very much a challenge because we work with the C-suite. We, many individual contributors, we have our own stories, our own experiences, our own lived experience, and can kind of resonate with the DE&I story, but it is that kind of your direct manager. So a couple things that we've done at Ally is we have implemented the Neuro Leadership Seeds model and have engaged all middle level management. We've invited them to do some workshops, not training, just workshops, understanding the methodology, being able to give language to different biases, and being able to have that conversation. what research tells us is bias training doesn't work. It's really about actually having a tactical experience with it and being able to call it out. We are very much in high turnover with, I think we've talked about the attrition rate. So the expediency bias, what's quick, what's fast, distance bias. We're remote. I'm in the office today. My boss is at home, at his home office today. So there's the distance bias, but those making sure that middle managers understand that. The second thing that we've done is we have kind of taken the resources to the employees. So we have a DE&I SharePoint within the Ally intranet, and employees can go in and look at some of the offerings that DE&I has and have shared with their manager, and they can go in and say, hey, I think this is interesting. Is this something we can do? So we give them the power to kind of ask for those workshops and conversations, crucial conversations. And then the third thing that we did most recently is we created an inclusivity toolkit, recognizing that the needs of a hybrid work environment are going to be very different. My experience as a mother, as a wife, as a Hispanic might be different than someone who is single with no children at home. And so the inclusivity toolkit is really an opportunity to have a dialogue and to say, hey, what does communication look like to you? What does psychological safety look like? And to really agree on those elements as a team. And we have charged the manager with leading that conversation. So that's an expectation for everyone. So a little kind of peppered on what we're doing, trying to cover the bases, because it is a challenge really when we kind of get into that middle management and ensuring that we're able to connect with everyone.
Thank you. Ketelyn, what are your thoughts?
Interesting to see from Brenda, right? Because we've been doing similar things in IBM, and it's like it just confirms to me that it's so much needed, right? And it's all together now. It's not only this, but the remote working, it's piling up, right? Mothers with small kids, fathers with small kids, providers with older parents. So it's all together. But there is one point that I think we've been doing here, and it sounds very simple, but it is to keep beating the drum that we have minorities and we cannot deny the fact. You would, this mid-management, we call the frozen piece as well, right? Like some people might even say, if you ask them, well, do you understand that Latino and Hispanics are part of this minority? The full answer is yeah, right? Yeah, of course I do. But do you understand why that is a pain point? So we've been having these open dialogues, and the first answer, yeah, as soon as you peel the onion for the next piece, they look at me if I had like three heads, right? So we've been doing a lot of these roundtables, and we try to bring this topic over and over and over again in nausea, right? There is even a joke the other week. They said to me, like, Ketelyn now has a little sign saying, have you remind yourself about diversity today, right? Because it is an everyday exercise. We are changing corporations' cultures, right? Culture that's been around for many years, decades, centuries, right? So we need to remind everybody every day. And there is one last point that we've been doing that I think it is important, and it's related to that. We are asking like candid feedback. We open this big discussion on candid feedback, and it is more to open this door that if the employee sees something is not going well, to raise their hands and their voices, right? And this is for everything, but that also includes Latino and Hispanics, right? I mentioned in the beginning when we were getting ready for this panel, right, that I joined the panel really early, like 4 or 5 minutes early. And I was mentioned to the team because when I joined here in the US, I'm originally from Brazil. When I moved to the US, I remember the first 2 or 3 meetings, somebody made a joke, a joke, right? Oh, Ketelyn is always on time. We don't expect her to be on time, right? Completely biased as this person is not even around anymore, right? Thankfully, but that can bring somebody down, right? I decided to take that and turn it around, right? To have this conversation. And one day I mentioned to this person candidly, I said, I do apologize for bringing this so candid, but this is not a joke. This is not funny. And if one person in the room is not laughing, it's not funny, right? Regardless if it's funny for the other 10. So having this feedback and having this open candid discussions, right? We had also some teams of some people participating on this team coming back to me last week saying, oh, somebody mentioned something about my accent, and I just said, well, I take your feedback, I will correct that word, but please next time tell me in a separated room. You don't need to call it out in the entire meeting in front of everybody, right? So I think we've been fostering this candid feedback. Let's make sure they understand it is a minority, it is something that we need to tackle on. And if you don't, make sure that you make your management understand that feedback is coming, right? And they have to accept and take it, because we are all trying to march to a better community together. And it's only going to work if this constant feedback, if you say, and I'm not saying everybody needs to be perfect the first day, as I said, it's centuries and decades of one way of working that we are trying to bring to a different level now. But I think this constant feedback will really help, and we are beating the drum that this mid management needs to be open to this feedback and retrofeed themselves and adapt as we hear from the people that are part of these minorities or these diversity groups.
Great, thank you so much, Tish. What are your thoughts on this? Because we're seeing a common theme about middle-level managers just not being as participatory in terms of the inclusion, and particularly the direct reports that often lead to that frozen middle. What are your thoughts in terms of that of that challenge that that Latinos, people of color, face between they get it. The executives often get it. Is that direct report that sometimes has that challenge?
Yeah, I agree with everything that both Brenda and Ketelyn actually just shared. I think they were spot on with their perspective. I think that, we spend a lot of time with senior leaders in the organization. And quite honestly, that doesn't necessarily always get cascaded down, right, to that frozen middle, which is what everyone is referencing it as. I think we have to do a better job at helping to equip and empower our leaders to express, model, and reinforce inclusive behaviors. And that is extremely important. I think the other thing is that, we have to really listen to the perspectives that are shared with us. So, Ketelyn, you were spot on with what you said. At Unilever, we have something called a Univoice survey, which is an employee engagement survey that actually allows us to be able to assess how we are doing with regards to various components of our talent strategy. And there are questions baked into that survey specifically around inclusion and diversity. We're able to disaggregate that data. So again, going back to the point that I made about really immersing ourselves in the data, so we can disaggregate that data by identity and by gender to really understand if there are any recurring themes with those different dimensions of diversity. And then I think once we start to do that, really taking action against what the survey results are. And then last but certainly not least, holding people accountable. I'm a firm believer that every leader should have an accountability objective in their performance review. And quite honestly, they should be held accountable for either their level of participation. I think with regards to hiring and having inclusive recruitment practices baked into how we make hiring decisions, developing and retaining talent, et cetera. But I do think that people leaders, all people leaders, not just executives, should have an inclusive leader performance objective.
Fernando, what are your thoughts? Mentorship, sponsorships, how is that impacting retention for Hispanics and Latinos in corporate America?
Well, I say yes to both, right? You need mentors and folks that you can learn from and can guide you. But also, I think the word sponsorship is also important because you need more than a coach, more than a mentor. What you need is advocacy, uh, especially as you're trying to grow your career. There are going to be discussions about opportunities and discussions about new roles or new projects that are taking place without you being in the room. So, in your absence, you need to have built that trust in those relationships with senior leaders that will advocate for you and be your sponsor as you progress your career. So, I think being aware of that and also being astute at building, fostering, and growing those relationships is key.
Great. Well, thank you. So with the time that we have left, I want to do one quick sort of lightning round question for all the panelists, and that is, and very briefly, to the best of your ability, briefly, what does the ideal retention strategy look like to you? I'll start with Ketelyn with Ketelyn.
For me, it is really like the work we are doing on the ground with the teams, right? So hearing them constantly, adapting the tools and the programs we know, looking at the data, right? But working as a community. I want to do it in conjunction, right? Data, information, feedback, and as I mentioned before, and beating the drum constantly that these employees need to have a sense of belonging. We need to leave biases. It's way 2020, right? We are 2 years past that. We are past those biases. We will only have a true modern workforce if we bet on diversity, if we bet on inclusion, and if we, from the best of our ability, work on this lack of representation, work on our Latino, Hispanic, show all the advantage our community has across the board, right? And keep everybody engaged as one community to not only like evolving from the ones that are part of corporate America as well, but set the pave for everybody that is coming behind us, not to face the same issues and just like be at their maximum capacity as everybody should be.
Great, thank you. And we'll go to Brenda. A very brief final thoughts.
Yeah, I think an ideal recruitment strategy, I think, is when an employee arrives at an organization, starts that organization in 30, 60, 90 days, a year later, the experience that they're having is what they were actually recruited for. I think when those two messages, when the message sent versus received are the same, I think that's when we have the perfect recruiting strategy. Because again, as we talked about attrition, if we're bringing someone on board and saying these are all the wonderful things, you're going to feel so included, you're going to belong, so on and so forth, and we kind of recruit them under that auspice, and then they get here and they're like, no, not really. Then we have a retention problem. So I think, again, the ideal strategy is that the expectation meets the actual experience of the employee once they actually get to the organization.
Great, thanks. Tish?
Yes, and I would say, just to piggyback on that point, I think also the employee having all of the resources that he or she needs in order to be successful. So someone coming into the organization, having those experiences, 30, 60, 90 days that align with the perceptions, having the resources in order to be able to thrive in their roles. And then most importantly, talent that's able to be developed and retained so that they can ascend to the most senior leadership roles in the organization.
Great. And of course, lastly, Fernando Delgado. Fernando.
I think the future is bright for young Latinos, young professionals, especially in STEM careers, anything to do with science, with engineering. I would say lean in. There's a number of opportunities that weren't available before or are as plentiful as they are now. And I would say also be selective, right? And be discerning in terms of your next step, your next career move as you go forward. Again, there's no better time to be a Latin professional than today. I fully believe that. And I think the opportunities will continue to expand and grow as corporate America is realizing the competitive advantage that Latino professionals bring to the organization. And it's an untapped market. So more to come. And again, the future is looking really bright.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you to our esteemed panelists, Brenda Reuter from Ally Financial, Ketelyn Jesus from IBM, Tish Archie-Oliver from Unilever, and Fernando Delgado from Johnson & Johnson. Of course, I'm Sid Wilson from HACR. Thank you all for your support and for tuning in, and we hope that you enjoy the remainder of the Hispanic Promise Summit. Thank you. Muchas gracias.